But halfway through the program, Tayo called her name. "And now let's welcome Adaobi to the stage," he said with a grin. Adaobi froze in her seat, her heart pounding. She hadn't signed up for the talent show. She knew this was a trap. The crowd turned to look at her, whispering and laughing as she slowly stood up. With trembling legs, Adaobi made her way to the stage, not sure what to expect. When she reached the front, Tayo handed her the microphone and said, "Go ahead, show us what you've got." The crowd erupted in laughter, waiting for her to fail. Adaobi stood there, holding the microphone, feeling her heart race. She could see Chinedu and his friends laughing in the front row, waiting for her to embarrass herself. But something inside her clicked. She was tired of being afraid, tired of being the one everyone laughed at. With a deep breath, Adaobi began to sing. Her voice, soft at first, grew stronger with each note. The crowd, expecting her to fail, suddenly went silent as they listened.
Whispers of the night fade away. Dreams of light and light the sky. I'm a river, never stray. Flowing on, my dreams will fly. Unstoppable, I am free. No chains gonna bind me, from the mountains to the sea. My heart sings its melody. Every step I take is bold. Every breath is a new start. In this world I break the mold. Singing with the fearless on the mountains. Oh, sings its melody.
Adaobi stood at the gates of Bullied International College. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her old worn-out uniform. Her mother had worked tirelessly to save enough money for Adaobi to attend this prestigious school filled with children of rich families. Adaobi stood at the gates of Bullied International College. In humble background, she felt like an outsider the moment she stepped on the other students in the sunny shiny shoes and carried the latest gadget. To save enough money for Adaobi to attend this prestigious school, her determination to make a rich family. As she walked to class, whispers filled the air. "Who is she?" one girl sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "She doesn't look like she belongs here." Adaobi's heart sank, but she kept her head down and hurried to her seat. She knew this was going to be difficult, but she didn't expect it to start so quickly. Chinedu, the boy everyone feared, sat at the back of the classroom, his eyes following her every move. "Look at her shoes," he said loudly, laughing with his friends. Adaobi's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. The next day, Adaobi walked into the classroom hoping things would be different. She sat quietly at her desk, trying to avoid the gaze of the other students. But the whispers started again. "Did you see her hair? So untidy." A girl named Sade whispered to her friends, loud enough for Adaobi to hear. Adaobi tucked her braids behind her ear, wishing she could disappear. Even the teachers weren't kind to her. Mrs. Bissy, who taught English, barely acknowledged her presence. During class, Mrs. Bissy would call on every student except Adaobi, as if she wasn't even there. One day, Adaobi raised her hand to answer a question. Mrs. Bissy glanced at her, but called on another student instead. Adaobi's hand fell to her side, her heart heavy. She had never felt so invisible in her life. Chinedu, however, never missed an opportunity to humiliate her. During lunch, he and his friends would sit nearby, laughing at her simple meals. "What are you eating today? Beans again?" Chinedu mocked, his friends joining in. Adaobi tried to ignore them, but the words stung. Every day was a battle to keep her tears hidden. Adaobi found solace in a quiet spot under a large tree at the edge of the school compound. It was there that she ate her lunch alone, away from the mocking stares and cruel words. As she unwrapped the small meal her mother had packed, rice with a little piece of fish, she heard footsteps. Her heart sank as Chinedu and his gang approached. "Ah, here she is, hiding like a rat," Chinedu said, his voice cold. Adaobi didn't respond. She knew that speaking up would only make things worse. "What's wrong? Too poor to eat with the rest of us?" One of his friends chimed in, laughing. Adaobi's chest tightened, but she kept her eyes on her food. Just as the laughter grew louder, a voice interrupted them. "Leave her alone." Adaobi looked up to see Emeka standing there. He wasn't part of the rich crowd, and he didn't usually speak much. But now, he stood in front of her, arms crossed, staring at Chinedu with a stern expression. "Why don't you pick on someone else for a change?" he said firmly. Chinedu smirked. "Look who's defending the poor girl," he sneered. "You're just as pathetic as she is." But Emeka didn't back down. He stood his ground, and after a tense moment, Chinedu and his gang walked away, muttering under their breath. Adaobi looked at Emeka, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Emeka shrugged. "Don't let them get to you," he said simply, before walking away. Adaobi watched him go, feeling a small flicker of hope in her chest. Emeka wasn't like the other students at Olumide International College. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't poor like Adaobi either. He came from a middle-class family, and his quiet nature kept him under the radar. After standing up for Adaobi, he began to notice her more. Every day, she walked into school with the same worn-out shoes and the same determined look on her face, even though everyone around her made her life miserable. One afternoon, as school let out, Adaobi struggled to carry her books. Her bag was old and the strap had broken, making it hard for her to manage. Emeka noticed and walked over. "Do you need help?" he asked. Adaobi hesitated for a moment, but nodded. Emeka took half of her books and walked with her in silence. They didn't say much, but the gesture was enough to warm Adaobi's heart. She wasn't used to people being kind to her. "Why did you help me the other day?" she finally asked, her voice soft. Emeka shrugged again. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "Just because you're different doesn't mean they should treat you like that." Adaobi smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you," she whispered again. It was a small moment, but for Adaobi, it meant the world. Chinedu couldn't stand seeing Adaobi smile. The sight of her finding even the smallest happiness infuriated him. "Why is she still here?" he muttered angrily to his friends one afternoon. "She doesn't belong at this school." His friends nodded in agreement, eager to follow Chinedu's lead. "We need to teach her a lesson," Chinedu continued, his eyes gleaming with a sinister idea. "Let's do something that will make her never want to come back." The others leaned in, curious about his plan. "Tomorrow, we'll make sure everyone knows just how poor she really is," Chinedu said, grinning. "Let's see how she handles that." The next day, Adaobi arrived at school to find her desk covered in glue. The moment she sat down, her dress stuck to the chair. She tried to stand up, but the fabric wouldn't budge. Laughter erupted from the class as they watched her struggle. Even Mrs. Bissy, who usually ignored Adaobi, had a smirk on her face. Adaobi's cheeks burned with humiliation as she tried to pull herself free. She could hear Chinedu laughing the loudest, enjoying every second of her misery. But she refused to cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Emeka had been watching the scene unfold from the back of the classroom. He clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. It wasn't just the glue on Adaobi's desk that made him furious. It was the way everyone in the class seemed to enjoy her suffering, including Mrs. Bissy. After class, Emeka found Adaobi sitting under the tree again, her eyes red from holding back tears. He sat down next to her, offering her his lunch. "I don't know why they're so mean," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I haven't done anything to them." "They're just bullies," Emeka replied, his voice calm but firm. "And bullies always pick on those they think are weaker. But you're not weak, Adaobi." She looked at him, surprised by his words. No one had ever told her that before. "Don't let them get to you," Emeka continued. "You're better than they are, and you have something they'll never have. Kindness." Adaobi smiled through her tears, grateful for Emeka's support. She wasn't sure how she would get through each day at this school, but knowing that Emeka was on her side made it a little easier. The next few days passed in a blur for Adaobi. Every time she walked into class, the snickers and whispers followed her like a dark cloud. She had started to dread school, and her once quiet presence had become a target for everyone. Each lunch break, she found herself retreating to the tree by the corner of the schoolyard. It was her only place of peace. But even there, the whispers from afar found her. Emeka continued to stand by her side, though. He would often join her during lunch, sharing his meal and offering quiet words of support. "They're just bored," Emeka would say, trying to comfort her. But Adaobi knew it was more than that. The students, even the teachers, treated her like she didn't belong, simply because she wasn't like them. She wasn't rich, and her looks didn't match the standard that everyone else seemed to value. One afternoon, Adaobi sat by the tree, staring down at her food, lost in thought. She felt a shadow fall over her and looked up to see Chinedu standing there, arms crossed and a smirk on his face. "You think you're something special because you have Emeka, don't you?" he sneered. "He can't protect you forever." Adaobi said nothing, her heart racing as she clutched her lunchbox. Chinedu leaned closer, his voice dripping with malice. "Soon, you'll wish you never stepped foot in this school." The next day, Chinedu and his friends decided to step up their bullying. They began a cruel game where they would pass notes in class, pretending they were talking about schoolwork, but instead filling the pages with insults directed at Adaobi. Each time a note was passed, they would look in her direction and laugh. Adaobi tried to focus on her studies, but the laughter and whispers were too loud to ignore. In the middle of a math lesson, Mrs. Bissy noticed the commotion and snapped at the students. "What is so funny?" she asked, glaring at the group of boys. Chinedu quickly slipped the note into his book and smiled innocently. "Nothing, ma'am," he said. Mrs. Bissy, clearly irritated, turned her attention back to the lesson, completely ignoring Adaobi, who sat there trying to disappear into her seat. At break time, Adaobi found herself surrounded by the boys. "Why don't you just leave?" one of them said. "Nobody wants you here." Adaobi kept her head down, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. But inside, her heart was breaking. It felt like no matter how hard she tried, nothing was going to change. After another miserable day, Adaobi sat under her tree, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She had never felt so alone, so unwanted. Emeka found her there, as he always did, and sat down beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just quietly sat with her, offering her a silent support that she desperately needed. After a while, he spoke. "You don't have to stay here, you know." Adaobi looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. Emeka hesitated before replying. "You could transfer to another school. There are other places where people won't treat you like this." Adaobi shook her head. "I can't," she whispered. "My mother worked too hard to get me here. I can't just leave." Emeka frowned, clearly not happy with the idea of Adaobi staying in such a toxic environment. But he understood her determination. "Then we'll figure something out," he said, his voice steady. "You're stronger than they think. Don't let them win." Chinedu noticed that Adaobi hadn't broken yet. No matter how much he and his friends teased her, no matter how much they tried to make her feel small, she still came to school every day. She still sat in class, kept her head down, and did her work. But Chinedu wasn't finished with her. He had one last plan to humiliate Adaobi in front of the whole school. It was the day of the school's annual talent show, a big event where students could show off their skills. Everyone participated, and it was one of the most popular days of the year. Chinedu decided this was the perfect opportunity to embarrass Adaobi once and for all. He convinced the host of the event, a boy named Tayo, to call Adaobi to the stage, pretending it was part of the show. As the event began, Adaobi sat quietly in the back of the auditorium, hoping to stay out of sight. But halfway through the program, Tayo called her name. "And now let's welcome Adaobi to the stage," he said with a grin. Adaobi froze in her seat, her heart pounding. She hadn't signed up for the talent show. She knew this was a trap. The crowd turned to look at her, whispering and laughing as she slowly stood up. With trembling legs, Adaobi made her way to the stage, not sure what to expect. When she reached the front, Tayo handed her the microphone and said, "Go ahead, show us what you've got." The crowd erupted in laughter, waiting for her to fail. Adaobi stood there, holding the microphone, feeling her heart race. She could see Chinedu and his friends laughing in the front row, waiting for her to embarrass herself. But something inside her clicked. She was tired of being afraid, tired of being the one everyone laughed at. With a deep breath, Adaobi began to sing. Her voice, soft at first, grew stronger with each note. The crowd, expecting her to fail, suddenly went silent as they listened.
Whispers of the night fade away. Dreams of light and light the sky. I'm a river, never stray. Flowing on, my dreams will fly. Unstoppable, I am free. No chains gonna bind me, from the mountains to the sea. My heart sings its melody. Every step I take is bold. Every breath is a new start. In this world I break the mold, singing with a fearless heart. Oh.
Adaobi's voice filled the auditorium, surprising everyone, including herself. She had never sung in front of anyone before. But now, with all eyes on her, she poured her heart into the song. By the time she finished, the room was completely still. No one laughed, no one whispered. For the first time since she had started at Olumide International College, Adaobi had the attention of the entire school, and it wasn't because of her clothes or her looks. It was because of her talent. The moment Adaobi stepped off the stage, the entire auditorium burst into applause. Even Mrs. Bissy, who had ignored her for so long, clapped with a surprised look on her face. Adaobi couldn't believe it. She had expected to be ridiculed, but instead she had captured the attention and admiration of the whole school. Chinedu, on the other hand, sat in stunned silence. He had been so sure that this would be the moment Adaobi finally broke. But instead, she had stood up to the pressure and showed everyone what she was capable of. For the first time, Chinedu felt a twinge of fear. Maybe he wasn't as powerful as he thought. As Adaobi walked off the stage, Emeka met her at the back of the auditorium. "You were amazing," he said, his eyes filled with pride. Adaobi smiled, feeling a sense of triumph she had never felt before. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't think I could do it." Emeka shook his head. "You've always had it in you, Adaobi. They just didn't want to see it." After Adaobi's unexpected performance at Olumide International College shifted, but not in the way she had hoped. While some students began to admire her hidden talent, others, especially Chinedu and his group, grew more resentful. They hated that the girl they mocked had managed to shine in front of the whole school. Adaobi noticed the change almost immediately. In class, Said, who used to whisper the insults about Adaobi, suddenly started greeting her with a fake smile. "Nice voice, Adaobi," she would say, but her tone dripped with sarcasm. The other girls followed suit, offering backhanded compliments that made Adaobi uncomfortable. It wasn't kindness. It was a new form of bullying, subtler than before, but just as cruel. Chinedu, on the other hand, didn't bother hiding his anger. One morning, as Adaobi entered the classroom, she found her desk scratched with harsh words. "You may sing, but you're still nothing," the message read. Adaobi's heart sank, but she refused to let them see her crumble. She quietly took her seat, ignoring the snickers from Chinedu's group. She had learned from her performance that she could rise above their cruelty. But deep down, the loneliness still gnawed at her. That afternoon during lunch, Emeka found Adaobi sitting under her tree, as she often did. He noticed the sadness in her eyes, despite the strength she had shown during her performance. "Why do you still sit here alone?" he asked, sitting beside her and offering her some of his food. Adaobi sighed. "Just because I sang doesn't mean anything's changed," she said softly. "They still treat me like I don't belong. Maybe it's even worse now." Emeka frowned, thinking for a moment. "You're not nothing, Adaobi. You're stronger than all of them. They just don't want to admit it." He paused before continuing. "But you don't have to go through this alone anymore." Adaobi looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Emeka smiled slightly. "There's a small group of us in this school who don't fit in with the rich crowd either. We stick together. If you want, you can join us." For the first time in a while, Adaobi felt a glimmer of hope. "Why would you want me to join?" she asked cautiously. Emeka shrugged. "Because you've got a lot of fight in you," he said with a smile. "And we need people like that." The next day, Adaobi hesitantly joined Emeka and his friends at lunch. It felt strange at first, sitting with people who didn't mock her or make her feel small. Emeka introduced her to the others. Tolu, a girl who was quiet but friendly, and Bayo, a boy who, like Emeka, came from a middle-class background. They weren't part of the popular crowd, but they didn't care. "We don't fit in with the rich kids, but we don't need to," Bayo said with a grin. "We've got each other." For the first time, Adaobi felt like she had a place where she belonged. She found herself laughing at their jokes and joining in their conversations. Emeka's group wasn't like the others. They didn't judge her for her clothes or her background. They accepted her for who she was. Adaobi began to look forward to lunch breaks, knowing she wouldn't have to sit alone anymore. But Chinedu didn't like this new development. Seeing Adaobi surrounded by friends made him feel threatened. He had lost his power over her, and that made him furious. "She thinks she's better than us now, huh?" he muttered to his friends. "We'll see about that." Chinedu wasn't the type to back down easily. He was determined to make Adaobi's life miserable, no matter how many friends she had. As he sat with his group, plotting his next move, a wicked idea formed in his mind. "If we can't break her spirit, we'll break her reputation," he said, grinning. His friends leaned in, eager to hear more. "We're going to make everyone in this school believe that Adaobi is a thief," Chinedu said, his voice low. "We'll plant something valuable in her bag, and when it's discovered, she'll be expelled for stealing." His friends exchanged excited glances. They knew how ruthless Chinedu could be, and they were ready to help him with his plan. The next day, Chinedu's group went to work. They stole a gold bracelet from one of the wealthiest girls in the school, Folek, and slipped it into Adaobi's backpack when she wasn't looking. Then, during the last period, Chinedu loudly announced that Folek's bracelet was missing. "Check everyone's bags," he demanded, his voice filled with fake concern. The teachers agreed, and soon the students' bags were being searched. Adaobi felt her heart race as her bag was opened. When the gold bracelet tumbled out, gasps filled the room. "Adaobi!" Mrs. Bessie cried, her face filled with shock. "How could you?" Adaobi stood frozen as everyone stared at her, their eyes wide with disbelief. "I didn't take it," she stammered, her voice shaking. But no one seemed to believe her. Even Mrs. Bessie, who had always ignored her, looked at her with disgust. "Stealing is unacceptable," the teacher said firmly. "We'll have to inform the principal." Chinedu stood at the back of the room, a satisfied smirk on his face. He had won, or so he thought. Adaobi's new friends, Emeka, Tolu, and Bayo, immediately jumped to her defense. "Adaobi didn't take that bracelet," Emeka shouted, stepping forward. "Someone planted it in her bag." "Why would anyone do that?" Mrs. Bessie asked, skeptical. "Who would want to get her in trouble?" Emeka glanced at Chinedu, knowing exactly who was behind this. "Because some people can't stand to see her succeed," he said quietly. Adaobi's eyes filled with tears as she looked around the room. No one else seemed to care that she was innocent. In their minds, she was guilty, just because she was poor. As Adaobi sat outside the principal's office, waiting for her fate to be decided, Emeka approached her with a determined look on his face. "We're going to prove you didn't do it," he said, sitting down beside her. Adaobi shook her head, feeling hopeless. "How?" she asked. "No one believes me." But Emeka wasn't giving up. "I know Chinedu is behind this," he said firmly. "We just need to find proof." Tolu and Bayo joined them, both equally determined to help clear Adaobi's name. "We'll figure something out," Tolu said gently. "You're not alone in this." That afternoon, Emeka and Bayo began investigating. They talked to some of the other students who had been near Adaobi's bag when the bracelet went missing. Slowly, they started to piece together the truth. One girl mentioned seeing Chinedu and his friends acting suspiciously near Adaobi's desk earlier in the day. Another boy recalled hearing them whisper about something just before the bracelet was found. Armed with this information, Emeka decided to confront Chinedu directly. "We know you planted that bracelet in Adaobi's bag," he said, cornering Chinedu in the hallway after school. Chinedu laughed, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. "You don't have any proof," he sneered. Emeka wasn't intimidated. "Maybe not yet," he replied. "But we're going to keep looking until we find it. And when we do, you'll be the one expelled, not Adaobi." Chinedu's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "Good luck with that," he said, pushing past Emeka. Back in the classroom, Adaobi sat quietly, unsure of what would happen next. She knew Emeka and her friends were trying to help, but the situation seemed hopeless. Chinedu had everyone fooled, and she feared that no matter what they did, she would end up being expelled for something she didn't do. The next day, Adaobi was called into the principal's office. She had barely slept, fearing the worst. As she sat in front of Principal Oladel, her hands trembled. "Adaobi, the evidence doesn't look good," the principal began, his voice stern. "A valuable item was found in your possession. How do you explain this?" Adaobi took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't steal the bracelet, sir. Someone must have put it in my bag." The principal's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who would do such a thing?" he asked, clearly skeptical. Adaobi hesitated, unsure whether accusing Chinedu would make things worse. But before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. Emeka, Tolu, and Bayo entered, looking determined. "We have something to say," Emeka announced. "Adaobi didn't steal that bracelet. We have information that can prove it was planted." The principal raised an eyebrow, motioning for them to sit down. Principal Oladel listened carefully as Emeka explained everything they had found out about Chinedu's behavior. Several students saw him near Adaobi's bag before the bracelet went missing, Emeka said. "And we believe he's been targeting her for months." The principal looked thoughtful for a moment, but still cautious. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "Do you have any concrete proof?" Emeka glanced at Tolu and Bayo, then nodded. "We're working on getting more witnesses to speak up, but we've already spoken to a few students who saw Chinedu acting suspiciously." The principal tapped his pen on the desk, clearly thinking over their words. "I'll speak to the students myself," he said finally. "But in the meantime, Adaobi will remain under observation. If this is all a misunderstanding, we'll find out soon enough." Though it wasn't the complete victory they had hoped for, it was a step in the right direction. As they left the office, Adaobi felt a mix of relief and anxiety. At least now someone was listening. Chinedu wasn't one to give up easily. When he found out that Emeka and the others had gone to the principal, he knew he needed to act fast. "They're getting too close," he muttered to his friends. "We need to come up with something that will completely ruin Adaobi's reputation before they can pin this on me." His friends, eager to stay on his good side, nodded in agreement. "What should we do?" one of them asked. Chinedu grinned wickedly. "We'll start spreading rumors. Make everyone believe Adaobi has been involved in other scandals. By the time the principal finishes his investigation, no one will care if she's innocent. They'll already think she's a troublemaker." That evening, Chinedu's group went to work. They began whispering lies about Adaobi to other students, making up stories about her stealing from teachers, cheating on exams, and more. By the next morning, the rumors were spreading like wildfire. When Adaobi arrived at school, she could feel the change in the air. Students were whispering behind her back, glancing at her with suspicion and judgment. She tried to ignore it, but it wasn't long before she overheard snippets of the rumors. "Did you hear she stole from Mrs. Adebayo's desk?" one girl whispered. "I heard she's been cheating in math class too," another boy said. Adaobi's heart sank. She hadn't done any of those things, but the rumors were spreading faster than she could defend herself. By lunchtime, it seemed like the entire school was talking about her. She sat alone under the tree, feeling more isolated than ever. Emeka and his friends found her there, their expressions grim. "Chinedu's behind this," Emeka said. "He's trying to ruin your reputation before the principal finishes his investigation." Adaobi looked down, tears welling up in her eyes. "What am I going to do?" she whispered. "Everyone already thinks I'm guilty." Tolu put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure something out," she said softly. "We're not giving up on you." As the days passed, the rumors continued to swirl around Adaobi, but Emeka and his group refused to let Chinedu win. They worked tirelessly, gathering more evidence and convincing a few brave students to speak up. Finally, they found a breakthrough. One of Chinedu's closest friends, a boy named Kunle, was starting to feel guilty about what they had done. Late one afternoon, Kunle approached Emeka in secret. "I don't want to be part of this anymore," he said quietly. "I know Chinedu planted the bracelet. I was there when he did it." Emeka's eyes widened. "Will you tell the principal that?" he asked eagerly. Kunle hesitated, but eventually nodded. "I'll do it. I can't keep lying like this." With Kunle's testimony, Emeka and his friends now had the proof. They needed to expose Chinedu once and for all. They rushed to the principal's office, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The next morning, Adaobi was once again called into Principal Oladel's office. But this time, she wasn't alone. Emeka, Tolu, Bayo, and Kunle were with her, ready to finally reveal the truth. The principal listened carefully as Kunle confessed everything about Chinedu's plan to frame Adaobi. "I'm sorry, sir," Kunle said, looking down at his hands. "Chinedu made me do it. He's been bullying Adaobi for months, and I didn't know how to say no." Principal Oladel's expression grew stern. "This is a very serious accusation," he said. "I'll be calling Chinedu in to hear his side of the story." When Chinedu arrived, he looked confident at first, but as soon as he saw Kunle, his expression faltered. "What's going on?" he demanded. Principal Oladel gestured for him to sit down.
"It seems we've uncovered some troubling information about the bracelet incident,"
the principal said. "Kunle has told us that you planted the bracelet in Adaobi's bag." Chinedu's face turned pale, and for the first time, he looked genuinely frightened. As the principal leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at Chinedu, the room grew tense. The silence was heavy, thick with anticipation. Adaobi's heart raced, her hands trembling as she waited for Chinedu's response. Would he deny it? Would he turn the tables once again? The seconds felt like hours as Chinedu glanced nervously at Kunle, then back at the principal. The truth was hanging in the balance, and one word from Chinedu could change everything. Her future, her reputation, and her life at the college. Just as Chinedu opened his mouth to speak, a knock echoed through the office door, sending a ripple of tension through the room. What happens next will leave you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe for part 2.
Whispers of the night fade away. Dreams of light and light the sky. I'm a river, never stray. Flowing on, my dreams will fly. Unstoppable, I am free. No chains gonna bind me from the mountains to the sea. My heart sings its melody. Every step I take is bold. Every breath is a new start. In this world I break the mold, singing with a fearless heart. Oh.
But halfway through the program, Tayo called her name. "And now let's welcome Adaobi to the stage," he said with a grin. Adaobi froze in her seat, her heart pounding. She hadn't signed up for the talent show. She knew this was a trap. The crowd turned to look at her, whispering and laughing as she slowly stood up. With trembling legs, Adaobi made her way to the stage, not sure what to expect. When she reached the front, Tayo handed her the microphone and said, "Go ahead, show us what you've got." The crowd erupted in laughter, waiting for her to fail. Adaobi stood there, holding the microphone, feeling her heart race. She could see Chinedu and his friends laughing in the front row, waiting for her to embarrass herself. But something inside her clicked. She was tired of being afraid, tired of being the one everyone laughed at. With a deep breath, Adaobi began to sing. Her voice, soft at first, grew stronger with each note. The crowd, expecting her to fail, suddenly went silent as they listened.
Whispers of the night fade away. Dreams of light and light the sky. I'm a river, never stray. Flowing on, my dreams will fly. Unstoppable, I am free. No chains gonna bind me from the mountains to the sea. My heart sings its melody. Every step I take is bold. Every breath is a new start. In this world I break the mold, singing with a fearless heart. Oh.
But halfway through the Bullied International College, but her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her future, her reputation. Her mother had worked tirelessly to save enough money for Adaobi to attend this prestigious school filled with children of rich families. Adaobi, with her simple clothes and humble background, felt like an outsider the moment she stepped in. The other students